Hey everybody, and welcome to another Adobe Live here at Behance. I'm joined by the one and only Owen Gildersleeve. Owen, welcome.
Hey, nice to be back.
It's so good for you to be back, and it's good for me to be back. We've all had a break over the summer, and it's so lovely to see everybody in the chat. Like everyone's come out for you today here as well,
Great.
Owen. And I've got to say, right, we've had some comments in the chat already, and my favourite is from Angus. Hi, Angus. Angus says Owen's work is like my tea, strong.
That's very sweet.
I love it. But hey, everybody. Honestly, thanks for joining us today. Really excited to be on the stream with Owen. This is great. We've got a full house as well. So Andreas is here, Angus, of course. Karina will it's just regular on Adobe Live, amazing work. Emma is a hi, Emma. James here. Oliver says Sandrine's in the house. And Sandrine does not put milk in her tea. Very strong tea game is happening across here. Have you got a cup of tea? I saw you drinking from a cup of tea then. You've got your cuppa with you, Owen? Yes.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Of
It's
course.
like a staple of a British designer.
I was going to say, this is the UK stream. You this is definitely.
You need a tea, just constant tea on loop.
You do indeed. Oh my gosh. Well, great to be here. I'm excited because I shared with Owen in the green room just before we came live that I followed Owen for a really long time on Instagram, which you've been doing some amazing work over the years. And I think my favorite thing of yours was the collaboration that you did with Lush.
Oh yeah.
Amazing. So for anybody that doesn't know you, please, Owen, give us, tell us a little bit about what you've done, some of your favorite projects, and what you're going to do today on stream.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So I'm a paper artist. I specialize in sort of handcrafted illustration, set design, art direction. And so everything I do is predominantly handcrafted out of paper, often using layers. And then those are shot in my studio using natural daylight. And we also work on sort of larger scale installations as well, like the Lush project you mentioned, where we're taking over window displays and creating sort of large pieces for those kind of stores and artworks for in galleries and various other places. And yeah, the Lush project was a lot of fun. They approached us to take over, I think it was 13 stores around Europe. So we created these sort of big 3D paper flowers, which we sent out to various stores. And then for the London store, which I think is the one you might have seen, we thought we'd take it a step further. And we actually built in some movement using Arduinos and animatronics. And that was a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun collaborating for that project. I teamed up with a guy called Thomas Forsyth, specializes in 3D design. And I often also collaborate with photographers and stylists, and it's really interesting seeing how far you can push a project and into different realms and possibilities.
I love it. And all of this is featured on your Instagram, right? So if anybody hasn't been, get on there now. I don't know if we've put the Instagram name or something, if we can pop it in the chat for you.
Yeah, well, it's just at Owen Gildersleeve. So you'll be able to see stuff. Yeah, we've recently, I think one of the most fun projects recently was teaming up with NASA, doing a project for the Earth Science Wing at their HQ in Pasadena. So it's for NASA JPL, which is a jet propulsion laboratory. And yeah, we got to create this sort of large scale artwork representing the atmospheric rivers, which are kind of like water vapor in the sky. And it's just so much fun working with scientists in their team. And again, just a chance to sort of bring my artwork to life in different realms and possibilities. It's brilliant.
It's so cool. And Angus mentioned it in the chat, and I think I'd seen the video that you did behind the scenes at NASA. You kind of show your process. There's like a step-by-step in there, and just show people how you do what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think always, I don't know, showing behind the scenes is an important part of my work. I think everything I make, there's so much development and process behind it. And it's often, I find that side of things even gets more attention than sometimes the finished artworks, because people like a little glimpse behind the curtain, see how artworks are made. And also it's nice with my process, everything is hands-on. There's a lot of making, creating, and it's nice to show people, that side of the story behind the artworks as well.
Oh, definitely. And that's why we love it, this, what we do here at Adobe Live, because we're looking behind the scenes, we're looking at processes, we're looking at how you do, the amazing things that you do. And so, we can get a chance to see more of that today, of course, because this is, we're going to dive into one of your projects. Tell everyone, we're looking at something that you've recently worked on today, right?
Yeah, so I thought I'd be interested to show some of the process behind a series I did for World Mental Health Month. It was a series in collaboration with Meta Open Arts, and it was a sort of chance to show the stories behind mental health, and I kind of talk about, well, I guess show the importance of narrative and actually sharing your story in order to not only help yourself, but kind of give others the chance to share their stories and start the conversation going, because there's still a lot of stigma around mental health awareness and around struggles. And so, yeah, just felt like a nice opportunity to try and sort of create a dialogue. And so I was asked to create a series of, I think it was 6 artworks in the end, which would appear on social media. And then also some of those elements would be pulled out and actually installed within spaces, which was a lot of fun. And so we had 6 different quotes. And I thought I could start with by showing my sketches. For this today, I really want to show the whole process from start to end. So often when I'm doing initial sketches, I'm just working in pencil. I'm very old school. I've been pushed many times to try and go onto like an iPad or what have you, but everything's just drawn in pencil, scanned in, and it's how I sort of best explore my ideas. And for this particular piece I wanted to show you was about neurodiversity. And so the quote was, "Neurodiversity does not make you weak or a failure, it makes you a warrior." And so I'm often supplying a range of different ideas with a project, giving a bit of back and forth with a client, and supplying some existing work examples as well. And then once sketches are approved, or once I've had feedback, I'll then throw these into Illustrator and start refining the forms. And so this artwork I was going to show you was one of the last I created of the series. So we kind of chose this kind of route of kind of showing like a headspace. We wanted this to be quite abstract, which is a big part of my work as well. Everything's very abstract, very graphic, lots of layers, lots of bold color. So jumping into Illustrator, and this is the first 4 artworks of the series. And these are all been inspired by different quotes about the path twisting and turning, about the importance of talking. And actually this piece was taken, I actually recorded my voice saying the quote and then took the waveforms and used those for the design. So a lot of the time everything's very abstract, but the abstraction has a reason behind it, it's like a narrative to why it's. And also a big part of my work is color, and so I chose this palette, and what I wanted to do for this series is recreate the idea of kind of like color overlays as if you're screen printing, or so you've got the mix of colors then creating new colors, and so also I really like a really stripped back palette. It's just as simple as possible, but every color has a purpose and a reason. So yeah, this is the series. So we then moved on to the neurodiversity piece, and after some conversations, we were thinking it'd be nice to show sort of like a brain form, but we didn't want it to be too obvious. And so we were kind of looking at this kind of Rorschach test style of illustration, but in this kind of multi-layered design. And so using the color palette, I drew up this design, and it's kind of, we thought mirroring would be quite fun and important, kind of creating a sort of brain-like form that we could mirror and then applying the colors. And what you'll see as I develop into the layered paper, I generally work dark to light in my layering. So the darkest layer will be the background, and then I'm layering up to the white at the top. So as you can see here, the white kind of is almost like a frame layer around the design. And then a bit back and forth, there's always a lot of feedback rounds, because with making, what I try and do is really get the designs finalized before I do any cutting. Because obviously, as soon as you start cutting, you're stuck. You know, it's very hard to go backwards. So we moved on to this brain was kind of working a bit too like a blob, and we wanted something a bit more refined. So I kind of created a slightly more, I guess, like, yeah, a bit more on a sort of Rorschach design. And it's just kind of like working in like organic layers.
This is so cool. I mean, everyone in the chat, you know, Angus is saying so good, and Enlightened Swami says that's great, and Sarah's like, wow, cool. Like, honestly, everyone, this is really cool, Aaron.
Ah, thank you. Well, it's just, I guess there's a lot of process behind the creation of these artworks, but it's also fairly straightforward. Like, I guess my knowledge of, I use a lot of Illustrator to do the designs, and then Photoshop to do retouching. And I'd say my skills are fairly rudimentary. You know, I'm not sort of the biggest pro at Adobe Illustrator or on the retouching side, but I've definitely picked up a few tricks along the way that have really helped to enhance my designs. And sometimes that's all you need, especially when there's like a cutting process in the middle.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Sorry. I was just going to ask, how do you come up with the color palette that you've chosen there? Because it's lovely. Like, it looks, I love the brightness of it. How did you choose? Where'd you?
Well, so I was actually creating some sort of color overlay. So actually picking up the colors, applying them to each other, kind of then thinking, well, this might be nice to instead be like more of a purple. And then, you know, just creating these kind of different way of layering. So that red is inspired by the overlap of the pink and yellow. And what's quite nice about this kind of palette is that everything's circular. So when you're starting to color, say, this piece in, which I'll start to add color to now. You can start sort of adding the color in and work through the palette. So you're going, you know, then into the, say, a blue, and then the blue can then go into like a green, which then leads you into the yellows, which then kind of leads back to maybe the reds. Yeah, so you're starting to create these sort of almost like rainbow of color tones. And also playing, I think negative space is really important as well. So you don't want, I don't think, you know, sometimes there's a tendency of creating everything in this kind of like filling out the whole space, but I actually think you need a bit of breathing room to let the forms like really sing.
And as you're designing this, like with the colors and the different layers of the colors, are you already thinking about the paper that you've got to cut to put into these places?
I think I'm quite often considering what paper I have. I mean, one thing which I'll show you in the Photoshop stage at the end is I quite often am able to push to my design. So I'll design to the palette I want, and then I'll find the paper as close as possible, knowing that in the retouch, I can like shift the pink to a more bold pink, or shift the blues to a slightly more like cyan or magenta blue. So yeah, often, and I guess also working with clients and other people over the years, sometimes they have a real set color palette or brand which they need to work with. So that's something which I've realized, you know, they may have a really set red, and trying to get that in paper is quite hard. So I'll just find it as close as possible. So this is kind of the final design. And what's good about working in Illustrator for me is I get to have a lot of chance to do back and forth with a client or collaborator to make sure these designs are fully refined before I do any making. And then once this is finished, it's then a case of making it. So jumping to my layering page. So what I've done is taken my artwork, and when I'm pulling an artwork apart, I'll do it in stages. So this would be the final mock-up. I then pulling the artwork apart, working from dark to light. So you're slowly deleting the layers till you have all of a separate form. And then these are then kind of colored. So once you recombine them, you can see that they all, you can see that they should all sit on top of each other nicely and start layering up to recreate our form. And so there's always like a few test runs, just making sure that this piece recreates the artwork that you want. And then obviously on the background layer, we've got the purple paper. So this is, yeah,
very cool.
There you go.
I can see Tony's joined us in the chat. Tony Harmer, say hi. Everyone sing hello to Tony.
Hey, Tony.
Owen, let us know, everybody.
Hey, Tony, how you doing?
Full house today, full house.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, once everything's drawn up and artworked, I then lay these out onto separate sheets, and then I either will print the line work onto the paper, so you know, just deleting this and printing this as faint as possible. What I tend to do if I'm printing it, will print it flipped, so that once it's cut out, I can flip the paper back round, and you're not seeing any of the design on the paper. Or if I'm sort of working on a job where the turnaround's quite quick or there's a lot to make, I'll use a Silhouette Connect, which is it's kind of like a cutting machine, like a printer, but with a blade. And so they actually have a nice little Adobe plugin where I send to Silhouette Connect. So instead of sending it to print, I'm sending it to my cutter. And you can see there's lots of different settings in here, and I will use the paper cut setting, which you can change the size and depth of the blade, and then send that through piece of paper. And then in the end, I'll have my cut piece. So that is this blue layer that you've just seen here. And yeah, some red bits, and these are all then taken and will be assembled. And so there's two ways that I'll go about creating the final piece. Sometimes it will just be all combined using pieces of foam board and then photographed, and that'll be one photo. But for this project, we required an animation element. And so in order to give as many layers as possible to my animator, for this project, I worked with a guy called Alex Purcell, who's a really great animator. We realized it would be nice if he had pretty much every layer of paper separate. And so what I would do is photograph each piece onto a white background, pen tool it, combine it in Photoshop, and then build in some shadows so that he can then bring it into After Effects and make things move. And so I'm kind of going to show you the final animation just to give you an idea of what we're working towards. Can you see this? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks so good.
So this is kind of what we're working towards. So we're going from this mock-up to this kind of final piece. And as you can see, in order to create this, we need all of the elements and typography in separate layers.
I love the fact that you can still see it's paper too. You can see the cutting, the edges. And
yeah, I think it's so important. But I think this is the nice thing about doing it for real. And actually, I think there's something you can't achieve digitally with paper cutting. You really do have to do a level of cutting in order to retain that sense of reality. I think it's just super important, because otherwise, one sec.
Yeah. And Tony would like to know, are you using a Cameo 4?
I actually just have a Cameo 2. But there are sort of like new versions now which are in place, and you can just buy them on Amazon or various other sort of places, but they're really good, and they're sort of a handy piece of kit to have, especially if you're working quickly, or I find nowadays as well, there's so much time spent on the development, and then there's quite a lot of time on the editing, but actually you need to get the cutting made as quickly as possible. And so it still retains that, because it is cut with a blade rather than say like a laser cutter, which burns the edges. So it kind of isn't too far off what we would achieve anyway with a blade, a scalpel. And so, but yeah, I use a surgical grade scalpel when I'm doing my sort of hand cut. So what we do is photograph each piece of paper individually. I just use natural daylight. I've got a big window in my studio where I have a desk, and I just lay a sheet of white paper, artwork on top, and I just stand over it. I haven't got a tripod. I haven't got any lights. It's just shot in the day. And then what you will do then is we'll pen tool this out. obviously working extremely quickly here, but just to give you an example of the layering. And then once this is all pen tooled.
Brilliant. Hey, I'm glad you also shared the details of the plugin, because Jane's been using a Silhouette for years. And in the chat said, I never knew there was a plugin after all this time.
Yeah, I mean, it's the savior, because then you're just sending it off to the Silhouettes. So yeah, this is kind of, you gather, it'll take me ages to actually do this properly, but I'm just going to pen tool a little chunk out. And then when I make a selection, I always do a slight feather. So I just do a 0.2, just because photos never fully crisp. And so you want to retain the same sort of level of softness. So just do a little copy and paste. And then I'll go to my artwork. And so what I do is with the Illustrator drawing, I've obviously used that for the layers. And so I also use it for my base to work on. And so I will start with, so say I've pen tooled that whole piece out. I'll start layering up on top. So this is the navy blue layer you've just seen. And that's just being cut and pasted and laid on top. And I'll do the same for each layer. So every layer that I've shown you, all of these nice bits of paper, photographed, pen tooled out, added to the mock-up. And so we're just building up all of the nice layers. So this is like this is the physical artwork. You can see the
so good.
But then what we've got to do is the retouch, and this is kind of where the time goes in, because you've got a lot of colors to match up to the designs, and you've also got these sort of lighting gradients going on, where the light is obviously at the top and you've got dark layers at the bottom. And so what we're then doing is going in and starting to add things like, so nice little curve. So what we on? This is the baby blue.
And there was a question in the chat earlier on, I didn't want to forget, which was about retouching. If you've got any tips for how you, retouch your images.
I guess make sure you're doing it all in separate layers and you're not actually affecting the actual piece. You know, it's all done separately, because as soon as you start adjusting the actual paper, you can't go backwards, and it's very hard to then, once you've got the final artwork, you realize maybe some of the tones are slightly off. And so and also not to overdo it, especially if you're working with paper, you want to retain that paper feel, and so you don't want to push things too far. So everything we do is quite subtle. And also one thing, sorry, I should have turned on earlier, is I've cut a bit of the mock-up and use it as a kind of overlay. And so what you can do is then you can see there's a bit of navy blue, which we're trying to match here. So you've kind of got something to work to in terms of like how far you want to push the colors. So I've got the color balancing going on.
Yeah, Kirsty says, more retouch tips, yes, please.
Yeah. And also so we do sometimes with this kind of work, you also want to just be careful of like dust. And you can see like, because this is photographed just in my studio, you've got lots of like dust and scratches and other things like that. So you can then sort of come in using the clone tool and working through.
I love to hear, you know, that you're just using a simple white sheet of paper, natural light. I was expecting, because you've got a studio in Brighton now, right? I was expecting you to have like a full photo kind of area, but it's really nice that this is just so, you know, it's just a really natural process, you know?
Thank you. I mean, we what I've realized with daylight is you basically can't get any better light source. And with paper, sometimes if you go too hard on the lighting, it washes out the grain. And so you realize the paper sheets just look super flat, whereas the daylight just retains this real nice texture. And I think that's really, really important for what I do. So yeah, we're just doing sort of like basic cleanups now. You might probably go back over it at a later stage. But I'll show you so we've got curves here, which is taking some of the depth of shadow off the bottom, using a slight gradient on top. Playing with levels. We've got a color balance as well, adding some different color, pushing the blues into a slightly more rich place. And then you've got a nice curves here, which I quite like. Just playing with 2 points. Again, you don't want to like crunch it too far, but you're kind of I find sometimes just adding a bit of base and then bringing the tops up a touch actually really helps to add a little bit of vibrancy, a bit more saturation to a piece.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of working through. So now we've got the greens. Again, you can see the greens are, so probably do a similar where I'm adding my little curve layer and the slight gradient.
Oh, Sandrine's got a good question. Sandrine asks, how would it look or feel if you scanned the paper instead of taking photos?
Well, I think this is the same issue as what we were talking about with like hard lighting in photography. As soon as you start, if light is too hard, it will really wash away any of the nice like natural feel. And I think a scanner does a similar thing, where it basically like burns the paper a bit too much, and so it doesn't look quite as real, because you want to really retain that sort of handmade feel in the end. It does work. It's worth giving it a go. If you haven't got like much daylight, if you're sort of stuck for that kind of setup, then yeah, I think it would work fine. But I would recommend photographing it, even if you're using your phone. That's still, it's not the best quality, but it can still just be your phone. It can even be outside. In the past, before I had Windows, I would sometimes just take my artwork into the street on a slightly cloudier day, and you can use bits of tissue paper as well if you want to sort of soften the light, which I find is always quite helpful. So we've got all of these pieces, and what I'm doing is I'm taking my retouch and then applying them, simple alt click, and then applying them to each layer so that you're not having to do the same retouching every time. And I find that's quite nice, because then you can get the color right for one and then push it a little bit further. And then again, playing with curves. There's a lot of curve sort of adding gradients and stuff like that, just to try and work against some of the lighting, which can sometimes push things a bit too far.
Sandrine's pointing at the problem in Brighton of taking outside to, get the images because of seagulls.
Yeah, especially if you're working with food.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I'm starting to build up the artwork layers here, and we've got kind of very similar, like fairly simple, just levels, curves, colors. Try not to crunch things too much. One thing some people might do is, photograph a piece of blue paper and then use that for everything else. But what you do is, if you're changing like the hue, you notice that the colors just shift in a strange way, because they, so you're really trying to sort of keep them as close as possible to the natural color. But then obviously we've got this mock-up that we're kind of trying to work towards.
You can still see the texture on that though, when you were going through the colors then, and
it still retains that. We've got the red layers. And then what I'm going to show you is a bit of adding in some shadows as well. So once I'm going to start turning on these layers, so you can kind of see it coming to life.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were just.
And I was going to ask, did you decide at the beginning that you wanted the animation element to this project, or was it that during the project and the creation of it that animation was something that would set it off at the end? Was it always at the beginning?
It was always something to consider right from the start, that there would be an animation element. So whilst working on this piece, I think it it affects how I approach the project, because if it's a if there's no animation element, I would have made this piece in just one go and just photographed it. And actually that is really nice in itself. Just taking a photo, you then have all of the nice natural shadows, and you're not having to play too much with trying to do this building effect. But because this is an animated project, everything needs to be layered, and so I'm approaching it in this kind of multi-layered style. And yeah, it adds a lot of time, but it does mean that life can be then added to the artwork at the end, which is important. And so what we're then doing is we've got a sheet of, I'm going to turn all these off so you can see what we're working with, but you can see how far we're able to push the paper on the background. So I've just, as a background layer, I've literally just shot a piece of paper in my studio, and I've dragged the photo in, and you can see like all the rough edges and stuff. And what I'm going to do is retouch this to be closer to the mock-ups that we were looking at. So,
and then I'm keen to know, like, what was the most complex project that you've worked on? Because I've seen, you know, the work that you have on Instagram, from the Lush project to the NASA project that you mentioned earlier. There's been lots, right? What's the most complex to date?
You know what, this project I'm showing you actually was a big one, because there were so many moving parts, and obviously we had the all the multiple artworks to make, with lots of back and forth with the team, and obviously working on a subject like mental health, you're really trying to be sensitive to that as well. You know, you don't want to I guess you want it to feel like something that everyone can look at and relate to. It's not aimed at, say, a specific group or category of person, because these are struggles that all people go through and everyone has to deal with in their lives at some point. And so that was quite a sort of challenge in itself. And then obviously any artwork that then needs to be animated like this, we're then having to create in this, you know, this kind of multi-layered style, which takes a lot of work. Another recent campaign actually did a big series for the Belveni whiskey company, and for them I had to do a large series of set design pieces, which were these like big set builds, multi-layered, with the bottle sat in the middle. And so we're creating these like full sets, all hand cut layers of paper, bottle in the middle, and then we were recreating the ingredients and the flavors of the whiskey as these kind of little paper elements stuck onto the sets. And that was, you know, when you're working in set design, that's a whole different thing, because you're often not able, like, unlike here where I can retouch, tweak, add in bits, refine. On a set, you're basically trying to do it all on the day. You know, everything's been pre-made and set up to a point. But there's only so much you can actually sort of build. And so the first time you're putting it together is actually, you know, live at the photo shoot. And that's always really nerve-wracking. And it's like the best feeling ever when you turn up and everything fits. And then you put the product in, whether it's a bottle of whiskey or whatever, into the set. And it's like, yes, it's an amazing feeling.
Oh, I love it. Has anything ever broken when you set up like that? Has anything ever ripped? Do you think, oh my goodness?
Yeah, there's always a lot of breaking, dropping, you know, things like that. And especially when you're working quickly, you've got to be very sort of careful about just rushing. I think rushing is like, especially when you're working with in a handmade realm, like you don't want to like nick your fingers or, you know, that's when accidents happen, because you're obviously working with really sharp tools. So yeah, it's something to be considerate of. And I just try and take your time, not to work too quickly.
That's good.
Just be considerate. But there's always something. And then obviously, like on a photo shoot, you also have a client on shoot with you. And so unlike sort of projects like this, where I'm able to hide away in my studio, put on some music, you know, you got a client like watching over your shoulder as you're sort of doing these builds. And that is super nerve-wracking as well.
That pressure. I think we've got some quotes that we've played over some live streams where it's like, make it pop, from like the hovering art director. Or
yeah.
So fun. But, oh my gosh. Hey, everyone, it's 12:35. 35 minutes. We're into a stream by 35 minutes already. If you're watching on YouTube, come over to Behance and ask any questions that you have for Owen. You know, pop it in the chat. I'll make sure that they're asked. And you do have a question, actually, Owen, from Tony, who asked about your children's book and how that's going.
Yeah, that was great, actually. Yeah, I worked on a kid's book, which is actually up here on my, I don't know if you can see it.
Shelf.
Yeah, it's called Let It Glow. It's a kid's book, A Winter's Walk, and it's just a story about sort of child trying to get home for Christmas Day. And this was really fun because they had like built-in lights in the book,
so
but
cool.
when it's actually turned on, will actually like turn on as you go through the pages. So yeah, this is a lot of fun, and the level of detail in these spreads was quite nuts to actually work through.
So cool.
But yeah, that was good fun. Working on a publishing project is always a lot of fun. It's just a whole different realm, and I don't know, the team's always super lovely as well, because you can imagine if you're working in publishing all your life, you have to be quite a nice, patient person. So what I was going to show you now is, so we've got the artwork sort of laid up.
Mm-hmm.
The next stage is the add-in of shadows. And this is something which over time I've tried to sort of work in different ways of doing. The way I find best is, so you've got the background, which I've retouched now. Got the basically a copied and pasted version of this, which I've just combined. So you've got it as kind of like a separate layer. My computer's and then what you can do is, so you've got we're working the work backwards up. That's always quite important, I find. So I'm going to turn off the other layers so we can just focus on this blue layer so you can see what's going on. So we obviously haven't got shadow here, and it needs to look like it's got some depth. And so what I'll do is take a kind of grab of it. And then edit. So I go select, modify, contract. So I do have shortcuts, but I thought it'd be better just to show you, because shortcuts will not help you. And then you realize when you use shortcuts that you can't remember where it actually is. So I tend to contract, because obviously when you've got a layered piece, the shadow tends to be a bit smaller. So say we'll contract by 5, select, modify, and then we do a feather. And because this piece, we want it to look fairly deep, I might go for a 40 feather on this one.
Okay.
So that's the layer. Then we're going to do a copy and paste on this paper that I've combined. And then we're doing a multiply. So what you can see now is you've got this nice shadow, which you can start moving up and down. Obviously, we're working on quite a dark piece of paper. But if you were to turn the paper off, you can see it's basically taking a grab of the paper. And what's nice is if you sort of zoom in, it's actually using the paper, so it's got a bit of nice grain and gradient in it, which makes it a lot more realistic than, say, if you're just creating something naturally.
Yeah.
So we're just starting to build this up, and what I'll do is, we've obviously got this background paper here already.
And do you do this for every layer then? Every single layer?
Yeah, so we're going to start building up the layers. And what that means is you can then, so you're going to turn the green on. I've got a little, obviously you've got all the elements here separately, but what I've done is just combined them here so that they're, you can just do it in one hit. And then again, we're going to select, modify, contract. So this one, I don't want it quite as deep. So I may do like a 4 contraction. And then maybe, let's say 25. There's a lot of trial and error with this approach. But what you are able to do is make some really nice, quite natural shadows. And then multiply. Again, you can start seeing this. And then it's got And what I think is quite important as you build up as well is considering, obviously, the shadow. It's hard to. I'm going to use my cursor. The shadow here is nice, and this is kind of the depth you want. But obviously, it's also trailing off and adding to the shadows at the bottom, which you don't want because that's not naturally what would happen. And so what I would do is take a little grab of this and then create a little mask. And so the shadows are now just only appearing as a mask on the navy blue, rather than falling off the edges. Yeah, because otherwise the edges are just going to get darker and darker and darker. And by the end, you're just going to sort of have this like mush of shadow, and it's not going to look very nice.
Yeah.
So what's not...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, carry on.
I was going to say, do you have a team with you in your studio in Brighton?
I do have assistants. Yeah, I have some great assistants who sort of help me out on a regular basis, and they sort of help with a lot of pen tooling, which is obviously quite a lengthy process. You know, especially if you're working like this, we're doing a lot of cutting, a lot of combining, a lot of then pen tooling to then get the pieces into Photoshop. And then what I tend to do is focus a lot on the pre-design, and then focus on the aftermath of the piece. So the sort of retouching, making sure the colors are right. I really enjoy the sort of cleaning up and building of the piece. And I also do all of this sort of shadow layering as well. But yeah, with making, you just need a lot of help. So I have like a really good group of people who've been helping I basically had to rebuild up my assistants as well in Brighton, because I had like so I was in London before, and you know, I had a really good team. And so but it's been great. There's a guy called Jack Snelling who's helping recently, Rosie Smith, who's come in as like a studio manager, and it's just feel like I'm starting to rebuild my team again here. And if anyone's based in Brighton and interested in some assisting work, give me a shout.
Perfect. There you go.
So again, we're just starting to build the shadows up. You can see sort of how it's working. What's happening here is obviously you've got a shadow building on the green, but also hitting onto the blue again. And so it's making these quite dark. So what we'll probably want to do is again, add a little mask, but also just sort of bring some of this back so it's not getting lost on the blue here.
Tony popped in the chat. He said, I should imagine that Owen needs a small team just to change the amount of blades he must go through.
Yeah, constantly working for his blades. There's a lot of cutting, a lot of making, and just a lot of process. I think it's a fun part though of my process. It's I think without the actual making side, I would sort of lose a part of, you know, the reason I got into this, which is to work with my hands. And so I really enjoy it. And although it does mean each project takes, sometimes, you know, there's additional stages which you might not have in a really like straight up illustration project. I just find that so satisfying, and you just have to build in additional time. And I think nowadays clients are also aware of paper cutting as a medium for illustration and design, which I think there was a period where it wasn't so popular. And so actually it was a bit of a harder sell. You know, they'd be like, how long would this take? You know, why are you actually making this for real? But I think now you see a lot of paper art in the design world, in advertising, a lot of big clients using it, such as Adobe. So it's very satisfying. Just seeing it becoming more popular part of
it's definitely more popular, isn't it? And do you have somebody that you would love to collaborate with, to turn their work into, you know, maybe their photography, to turn that into paper art, for example?
I think it would be nice to work on, I think the motion side's been exciting, seeing that developing, and it'd be nice to work on a bit more film, TV, starting to move into those realms. You know, so that would be exciting, I think, just seeing where that could push it and how far we can, because the motion side of what we've done, we've kind of dabbled with, and it's obviously becoming way more popular animation, especially through, you know, all the social media forms. Like motion is actually really key now. And so, yeah, I think that's something I'd really like to just see how far we can go. And actually for the Belveni job, what was interesting is they actually took my set design pieces and rebuilt them. There's a studio called Parallel Studio based in Paris, and they actually rebuilt my sets as a full CGI piece. And what was amazing was seeing then how far they could push the motion, because obviously there's a limit to what you can do in stop frame. And so, yeah, it was amazing just seeing these pieces being pushed in, like things building and growing, and the sets being viewed in this sort of 3D realm, which we wouldn't be able to do actually a lot of the time in stop frame. One thing I'm doing here is just adjusting the hues, because obviously all of this is being taken from the purple, but obviously we want these shadows to be more in the red realm, you know. So if everything's purple, you can see it's going to be really dark and dirty. So I just sort of add a little grade and a little hue there, just to sort of, and then we've got the yellows. I'm actually doing these as a group, by the way. I just wanted to mention, but actually in the final, the actual final piece I supplied to my animator, every single cutout was separate. So I'm obviously building the shadows here as like full groups of color. But yeah,
cool.
Just to save a bit of time. But yeah, quite often if we're going to do an animation project, you just want as many layers as humanly possible.
Of course. You know where I could see your work? You know the, like the, I don't know what to call it really, like an ident or a title, you know, ITV, where they have sometimes they've got like sticks of rock kind of moving, and you hear the rock, you hear the sound, or you hear like tea brewing, or there's like one with carpets and fur, and I can imagine seeing you do something, you know, with the ITV, the letters and the paper, the sound of paper. I could see you doing that. Yeah,
that'd be wonderful. I was pitching on some stuff with Netflix at one point as well, which would be awesome. So yeah, I mean, things like that. Yeah, it's really nice seeing the work come to life. I think that's really important. So one thing I wanted to point out is we've got a little situation with the layering here, where obviously you've got the yellow onto a red, which is quite shallow. But you've then also got the yellow onto a green. And so what we want to do is do two separate shadows. And so I've got a shadow which is quite a bit harder for the yellow onto a red. And for that one, I'll do a little mask here. So we've got, that is now just affecting the red. And then we'll do another one. Select modify. So I'm just, again, not using the shortcuts, just for you all. And then I think 40 again. Go back down. Copy, paste.
There was also a question, Owen, about whether you do courses. Like, do you have anything like that at all?
I've been thinking about doing some workshops. It's been obviously hard during the pandemic to actually do any sort of like workshops in the studio, but it's something I've been thinking about doing a bit more. So yeah, if anyone is interested in that kind of thing, give me a shout. It's been nice actually seeing things opening up again, and actually the possibility of that coming out again. So yeah, and we've got this nice space now. My studio's on Orange Row in Brighton, so it's right in the centre. So nice. So yeah, also swing by if you're ever in the area. So yeah, you can see we've now got these two shadows, and they're slightly affecting different parts. Again, so I've got a hard and a soft going on. And then this is the final one. So we've also got, I've had a little line which cuts through. This line, I have to say, is taken from my mock-up. So it's actually not being cut. It's been sort of dropped in as a sort of a white line. And then again, added a little shadow to it. And then the final piece was this little butterfly. And you can see this butterfly, what I did when I made it. Ooh, sorry, my computer's having a little moment. Is giving it a little fold. So you can see it's kind of like folded. But again, this has just been shot on a piece of paper. I can actually show you the original.
I love that you've zoomed in and we can see all of the paper, all of the cuts, and it's so good. So good.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's just nice. You can see all the sort of cut edges. You can see these like little nicks that are happening here, which you wouldn't get if you weren't cutting paper for real. And yeah, just being able to sort of add life to the forms, I think, is super important. And again, like I've been doing with the layering, I've added a little shadow to this as well. And so once it's all closed up, this is like kind of the final piece. And what I'll do once this has been, sent over, approved, everyone's happy. And you can see you can basically turn every layer on and off, so the animator can kind of move this. We'll then sort of start combining all of the retouch and cleaning it up, because obviously when you supply to an animator, you want things to be as neat as possible. So I've now, instead of having all of these layers, I've got this all combined. I'll, title this navy blue shadow. And then when the animator gets it, it's really straightforward and simple for them. And I'll obviously delete any sort of unused layers. And this is kind of like this is kind of what I would supply to them at the end. Like a nice little layered up file, which is super clean and easy then to take on. Because obviously with the animator, you're often working together, but you just want them to not get lost in the layers as it's being brought into After Effects and just like, and also sometimes do little animations and GIFs in Photoshop, which is quite fun, just seeing the layers build up and down, showing that this has actually been crafted.
Love it. Sean asks, does Owen color his layers to match his colors? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so actually you mean coloring these files to match the colors in the paper, I'm guessing. Is that what you mean? I don't. That's a good question. But I mean, maybe I should start doing that. But yeah. And I think just going in on the final retouching, sort of in terms of sort of final notes as well. One thing with the pen tooling is that you'll see sometimes it's gone a bit too far off the edge and you've got these little kind of white pieces coming in. And this is where the red has been laid onto a white. You've pen tooled it out, but you've maybe missed a little bit. So that's something to just have a look at. And obviously just using the clone tool, we're kind of doing little sort of, cleanups, just really sort of simple stuff. And again, looking at, you don't want to take away too much of this grain. And I do often leave a fair bit of this on the edges because it does retain the handmade feel, but you don't want it to go too far. So I will sort of, spend time just kind of working, and it's quite often, especially if you're working, say, on a commission, this is something I do at the end. So I'm quite happy to send, just to be like, this is what the artwork's looking like. And actually the jump from the mock-up is quite extreme, so for a client to receive this is always quite exciting, I think, for them, because although I try and show stuff work in progress as I go, really the last thing they've seen is this, so you send a mock-up and then now they're receiving the finished piece. And so I send this kind of retouch to a point, and then it's during their feedback time, they often have people to like show to, and I'll spend time cleaning up, getting rid of sort of all these little bits of debris and other stuff, and just getting as clean as possible, but retaining some of these nice little nicks. I love stuff like this where it's just got a bit caught, and because if you go too far, it just starts looking digital, and then what's the point of actually making it? You're right. And there's other how long? What are we doing?
We still got 5 minutes.
Okay, great. I was going to show you one final thing you can do as like a little trick with a photograph as well. So obviously I've been building in shadows, but you can actually retain the shadow if you want to. And so we're going to do a little just pink. So what I mean by this is actually you can see this has got a nice natural shadow in it, which is really hard to recreate digitally. So what I'll sometimes do as well, instead of totally building it from scratch, I'll actually use this shadow. So I'll pen tool at the top there, which I'm obviously doing very quickly because we've got 5 minutes. And this is using...
Would select subject work for this in Photoshop instead of the pen tool going through every section?
It's never as nice. Like the edges are sometimes get a bit frayed, and I do sometimes do it, say if you've got a multicolored piece and you just want to sort of select the yellows just for like a bit of a subtle retouch. But what you notice is it gets quite frayed, and it just doesn't cut it quite as cleanly. And this is a sort of one method I have found, which is actually quite, I don't know, it just kind of retains that nice sort of soft edge. So this is obviously very quickly done. But what you can see is you've now got this butterfly, which you can kind of, maybe not that much, but you can do an adjustment layer and use an alt click. I'm sort of combining it just with that one, just for those who don't use Photoshop quite as much. But what I also do, we'll do quite a rough selection, just using a lasso tool, and do a copy and paste. And this now is for shadow. So what you can do is multiply it, and then again with curves,
Tony has a question. Oh, yeah, perfect. Look at that.
And then what I do is probably take some of the hue out, because you can see by pushing it so much, it's kind of burnt it a bit. So I'll push that into the gradient, like, take it, most of the saturation out actually on this one. I think that looks quite nice. And so what you can see now is, and then when you group those, you've then got this nice little butterfly, which you can place on basically any color.
Yeah.
And it'll kind of look like it's kind of on that background. So that's one way of doing it as well, without building the shadow from scratch.
That's a good technique, because it's so natural. Natural shadow is perfect. You do have a question from Tony, who wants to know whether you use a folding bone or the back of a scalpel.
I do. I use sorry, I just said I do, and I realized that's a question of two.
Yeah.
I use both, but the folding bone is my go-to tool, which you can buy. It's just, it's literally just a piece of bone, which I have in my pencil case. Cool. Or every illustrator has a pencil case, but yeah, that's kind of what it is. And these are really good for scoring, because obviously if you use a scalpel, you'll sometimes cut the paper by mistake. So that's, so that's how this butterfly has been done.
Love it. Thank you, Owen. This has been like a treat, this stream, honestly, just to see you put this together, all of the process, everything that goes into the shadows and the layering and the colors, like everything that's been considered, including something you mentioned at the start of our stream, which was the sound waves. I'm actually saying like all of that,
Thank you.
Just really, really amazing stuff. Everybody's had great things to say through the chat. We've had lots of really great comments. Everyone's really really just in awe of your work. So thank you everybody for joining and contributing to all of the questions. This week it's all about illustration. So we have Tanya and Lucy here, and they'll be designing an animated icon tomorrow and on Wednesday for our next two streams. So, definitely come back and join us for that. Oh, and this has been amazing. I've been a fan for a long time. I feel really great that, lucky to have met you. So thank you very much.
Oh, bless you. That's so kind. Thank you. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's joined in and ask questions. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks to you as well. It was really nice to meet you finally.
And and we look forward to seeing some of your work appearing maybe on Netflix or in video and on TV soon, right? So
we'll see. Yeah, and there's a couple of exciting exhibition plans developing at the moment. So if you keep an eye on my Instagram, you'll find out more details about that soon.
Fabulous. Well, thanks again. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you back at Behance tomorrow, same time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.